pretty serious crisis of imagining the future at all in many ways, and it's generally portrayed in all these sort of rather bleak, dismal ways. I'm very pro technology. I think there's sort of many ways that progress in technology is critical for a better future on many different levels. But if you look at if you want to get sort of a sense of the zeitgeist, if you look at all the science fiction movies that are made in Hollywood, they almost all portray a future that doesn't work, where technology destroys people. You have robots killing people like the Terminator. You have, we're all plugged into the Matrix, Avatar, Elysium. I watched the Gravity movie the other day. You would never want to go into outer space. You'd be very happy to be back on a muddy planet somewhere, a muddy island somewhere. And I think that this, and so I do think there is this sort of sense that we no longer have as much confidence about the future being a better place. I'm very hopeful about the future. I'm not sort of utopian or sort of indefinitely optimistic. I think that I disagree with sort of the Ray Kurzweil formulation where the singularity is near, and we have these exponential technological curves, and all that we need to do is sort of sit back in a movie theater, eat popcorn, and watch the movie of the future unfold. And so I think these questions about the future, I don't think the future is this thing that just exists, but I think it's something that we should always talk about in terms of human agency, and it's always a matter of choices about what sort of a future we want to create. And I think that's always a constructive conversation to have.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think Western society in general over the last 200 years has privileged, and there's been massive studies done on this, has privileged left brain thinking, that is close-up analytic reasoning, kind of chartered accountancy thinking, if you like, rather than big picture music, metaphor, faith, imagination thinking, which has been regarded as a kind of a leisure activity for those who fancy that sort of thing. But then we come back to reality, which is the small-scale processing. And I think that's been deeply unhealthy. One of the biggest books on this recently, Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary, argues that what happens when the two brain hemispheres get separated is schizophrenia. And if somebody is running simply on the left hemisphere, there are certain signs of what happens. And he argues then at great length that that has happened and is happening in Western culture, which is precisely regarding the imagination as the leisure activity which won't actually be necessary for the real task, but it's just kind of fun if you want to use it. And he argues strongly that instead we ought to try in all ways we can to reverse that and to privilege the imagination and the arts and music and metaphor over against the rather boring flat rationalism of the small scale. So I think that's gone on and is going on. And I should say, by the way, I gave a lecture incorporating some of this stuff in St Andrews 2 or 3 years ago. And there was a leading brain scientist in the audience who took me aside afterwards and said, it's not quite as easy as that. So just in case there are brain scientists here, I'm well aware that there are always academic wrinkles to be had and footnotes, but this is the layman's broad brush version of it.
I wasn't going to say.
No, of course, thank you. It's kind of you. But I think, so it's not just that we can't imagine the future. I think that imagination has been diminished throughout our society. And I think particularly because in my world, and I suspect yours, so much of our society, we've lived with these two things. Peter talks rightly about this dystopia idea of, oh my goodness, things are getting bad. And I think that's a secular version of what was really a 19th century worldview, which is the kind of premillennial worldview that actually the world is getting worse and worse and Satan is taking over and wickedness is happening and we little few who are left maybe have to be snatched away or whatever. And that's still a popular, obviously, bit of theology in some quarters. But I think what we're now seeing is the sort of the secular version of that. But that sits awkwardly with the idea of progress, which many people still embrace, and many people still will say, we've got to be on the right side of history, or whatever, as though we knew where history... And both of these have inhibited the imagination. Because if we know that progress is happening, then, as you say, we just sit back and watch the movie. If we know that dystopia is happening, then we find a place to huddle and try and stay safe. So we need the imagination to open those horizons.